Okay, let's jump right in. In this explainer, we're unpacking a series of articles that level some pretty serious allegations against Philippine Senator Joel Villanueva. We're going to break down the core claims, the evidence the source points to, and the big conflict at the center of this whole thing. Wow. Right off the bat, the source material uses this incredibly powerful quote to frame the entire story. It really sets the stage for what it argues is a major clash between the senator's public image and a trail of accusations. So, what's this all about? Well, the articles really boil down to one central claim that Senator Villanueva's entire political brand, which is built on faith and morality, is, according to them, directly contradicted by facts, photos, and some big financial numbers. And here's where you really see the two sides clash. On one hand, you've got the public persona, this image of a values-driven leader, a man of faith. But on the other side, you have the source's accusation, a fraudulent prophet, who they claim uses that faith as a kind of political insurance to bat away any criticism. The source builds its case around these four main pillars. It alleges the senator denied knowing a key engineer, that he benefited from some questionable budget deals, received a legally flagged campaign donation, and used his religious brand as a shield. So let's dig into that first pillar, the denial. This brings us to the contradictions. The source starts laying out what it calls the receipts, documented evidence that it claims directly refutes the senator's own public statements. This is the starting point, right? A Senate hearing where Senator Villanueva says, on the record, I do not know any contractor or DPW engineer. It's a very clear, very public denial, and it's right at the heart of this whole controversy. But the source immediately pushes back on that denial with these points. It shows photos and videos of the senator with DPWH engineer Henry Alcantara. It even points to an event where Villanueva apparently introduced Alcantara as the most handsome district engineer. The writers argue this isn't just a random photo op. They're claiming it shows a clear pattern of association. All right, now let's follow the money. The source zeroes in on a huge number. 12 billion pesos. That's about 200 million US dollars set aside for flood control projects in the senator's home province. But according to the articles, it's not the total amount that's the main focus, it's the piece that was allegedly skimmed off. Because the source cites allegations of a standard 20 to 25% cut going to the political funder. If that's true, that would be a staggering 2.4 billion pesos. We're talking over $40 million, allegedly just siphoned right off the top. And the money trail they present doesn't stop there. Because then you have this, a 20 million peso campaign donation. Now, the source flags this because it reportedly came from a construction company that had active government contracts at the time, which is a potential violation of the Philippines' election laws. So beyond just listing contradictions, the articles argue that the senator's response wasn't just spontaneous. Instead, they claim his denials follow a very predictable script, what they call a damage control playbook. And here is that playbook, broken down. The source alleges it starts with a flat-out denial, then a deflection, asking why he's the only one being questioned. That's followed by minimizing the connection, calling the engineer just a kababayan, or countryman. And finally, the last step is to claim victimhood by calling the accusations fake news. According to the source, the timing here is everything. They present this timeline as proof of a calculated move. On August 19th, Villanueva gets an official denial of lobbying on the Senate record. And then, just one day later, Engineer Alcantara is publicly named as a key figure in the whole controversy. The source really drives this point home with this direct quote. They're interpreting the senator's actions not as a coincidence, but as a deliberate strategy of preemptive insulation, something you do to get ahead of a story when, as the quote says, the facts are inconvenient. Okay, and this brings us to the final part of the source's argument. They claim the fight has now escalated beyond politics and into the legal world, with threats of lawsuits being used to go after critics. The source uses a very specific term for this tactic, lawfare. Basically, it's using the legal system not necessarily to win a case, but to scare, intimidate, and silence your critics. The articles frame the senator's threatened lawsuits as a classic example of this. The source then puts this threat of lawfare right up against the bedrock principle of free speech in the Philippine Constitution. This really highlights just how high the legal bar is for a public official to sue their critics, especially when it's about matters of public interest. And this leads to the source's core defense. They're essentially arguing that when your criticism is backed up with evidence, photos, public records, timelines, it's not libel. They're calling it a constitutionally protected act of public accountability. And that's really where this explainer of the source material leaves us. It paints a picture of a stark conflict, sermons on one side and receipts on the other, a public persona of faith versus a paper trail of questions. And ultimately, it poses this final thought-provoking question for all of us. In a democracy, what really is the ultimate measure of a leader?